Welcome back after the break. Now, as promised, stories in detail. We start from Afghanistan, where at least 50 insurgents and Afghan soldiers have been killed in renewed clashes across the country. More than 20 others were injured in fighting. The Interior Ministry said that 35 Taliban fighters were killed in ground operations in Kandahar and Takhar provinces. Taliban said 15 government soldiers were killed during clashes in Helmand and Takhar provinces. 2 Palestinians have been killed and 2 others injured in an Israeli airstrike in the Gaza Strip. Israeli forces killed 2 more Palestinians during weekly protests along the Gaza border. The Israeli army said it hit a Hamas base after 2 of its soldiers were injured during clashes along the border. Earlier, Israeli forces injured 7 Palestinians protesting in Kafr Kadum village of occupied West Bank. Israeli forces arrested 2 Palestinians, including a child, during a raid in occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, United Nations has called for a halt to the Israeli authorities' demolition of Palestinians' properties in East Jerusalem. UN humanitarian coordinator Jamie McGoldrick said that hundreds of Palestinians have been displaced. He said that the total number of demolitions in occupied West Bank in 2019 has risen to 214. In another development, the United States has imposed its toughest sanctions ever on Iran to prevent it exporting enriched uranium. The U.S. has also announced sanctions on Tehran over storage of heavy water. Washington also extended sanction waivers allowing Russia, China, and European countries to continue nuclear cooperation with Iran. The measures are part of a campaign to halt Tehran's ballistic missile program and curb its regional power. Meanwhile, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said Tehran must counter U.S. sanctions by continuing oil and non-oil exports. Meanwhile, at least 26 people have been killed in India and Bangladesh as Cyclone Fani struck the east coast. Officials said dozens were injured and over 2,000 houses destroyed by the storm in Bangladesh. Rescue officials said over 1.6 million people have been taken into shelters. Some 36 villages were flooded as a tidal surge breached dams. The cyclone was downgraded to a depression by the Indian Meteorological Department. Moving on, at least 18 civilians have been killed in 2 terrorist ambushes following an attack on a military vehicle in central Mali. Officials said 12 civilians were later killed when they went to investigate the blast scene near the village of Tagula. Later, another 6 civilians were killed in an ambush at the same site. Earlier, the explosion claimed the life of a soldier. Over now to North Korea's eastern coast, where the country has tested several short-range missiles. South Korea said the missiles were fired from the Hodo Peninsula. The projectiles flew 70 to 200 kilometers before crashing into the sea. White House spokesperson Sarah Sanders said the U.S. is aware of Pyongyang's activities. She said Washington will continue to monitor the North's behavior. The development prompted a telephone conversation between Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The 2 ministers agreed to share information on the missiles tests. Meanwhile, South Korea said Pyongyang must avoid raising tensions on the Korean peninsula. In another development from Asia, King Maha Vajiralongkorn has been formally crowned as the divine monarch of Thailand. This is only the beginning of a 3-day coronation ceremony in the Southeast Asian country. King Vajiralongkorn inherited the throne in 2016 at the death of his long-reigning father, Bhumibol Adulyadej. The new queen, Suthida, also joined Vajiralongkorn in the ritual. She originally joined the king's household as his personal bodyguard. The coronation takes place against a background of uncertainty over the recently held general elections. The power battle between the current military junta and a democratic front is still unresolved. Meanwhile, a Boeing 737 carrying 143 people has crash-landed into the St. Johns River near Jacksonville in northeastern Florida. This happened as the flight arriving from Guantanamo Bay in Cuba attempted to land during a heavy thunderstorm. At least 27 passengers have been injured in the incident. The mayor of Jacksonville, Lenny Curry, said that crews are working hard to control jet fuel on the water. Moving on, 9 people, including 5 children, were killed after a boat carrying migrants sank off the northwestern coast of Turkey. Turkey's Coast Guard said that 5 people were rescued. A Coast Guard official said the vessel was carrying 17 migrants. 4 boats and 2 helicopters carried out the rescue and search operation. Next, at least 20 civilians have been killed in shelling and airstrikes by regime forces and their Russian allies in northwestern Syria. War Monitor said that 4 women were among those killed in Idlib and neighboring Hama province. They said that the attacks have been continuously escalating for 4 days. Meanwhile, Kurdish-led forces ruled out any settlement on the future of territory they control through a Damascus-prescribed deal. Their chief, Mazloum Kobani, said they are ready for dialogue with Damascus to reach a democratic solution. But he said reconciliation can't resolve existing issues. This comes as delegations from 7 countries met in Geneva to discuss the future political process in war-torn Syria. Led by UN envoy Geir Peterson, the talks focused on the recent bombing campaign in rebel-held northwestern Syria. In another development, U.S. President Donald Trump has discussed a possible new multilateral nuclear accord with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. The 2 leaders spoke over the phone for more than an hour about a wide range of issues.
Soon after deliberating on outstanding issues with Turkey, President Donald Trump discussed contentious matters with Russia. In a series of tweets, President Trump said he had a very productive call with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Issues ranging from North Korea, Ukraine and Venezuela to trade and nuclear weapons came under discussion. White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said the 2 leaders talked about extending the scope of the nuclear accord. U.S. President Donald Trump called for a peaceful transition in Venezuela. President Donald Trump also raised the issue of North Korea and urged Moscow to play its role in denuclearization. Both the leaders exchanged views on Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of Russian meddling in 2016 U.S. presidential elections.
Turkey has said that Ankara is not distancing itself from the NATO alliance by purchasing S-400 missile defense systems from Russia. Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Ankara should not be excluded from the F-35 warplanes project over the deal with Russia. He said that the U.S. has shown flexibility in its approach to a planned safe zone to be established in northeast Syria. In the White House, senior advisor Jared Kushner has said that his Middle East proposal is not an effort to impose U.S. will on the region. More in this report. Trump's son-in-law argued that his proposal was delayed for 18 months because of Israel's election. Addressing a conference in New York, Kushner said his proposal addresses core issues such as the state of Jerusalem. He said the plan will help the Palestinians reinforce their economy. White House's senior advisor on Middle East, Jared Kushner, did not say whether his proposal calls for a 2-state solution. Kushner backed President Trump's policy of abandoning the Iran deal. Jared Kushner is expected to unveil his proposals in June after the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan. Arab officials and analysts believe the plan is likely to be pro-Israel. Moving on, France and Iraq have vowed to continue the fight against ISIS in Iraq and the region. France's President Emmanuel Macron met Iraq's Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi in Paris to discuss bilateral relations.
In March, the US announced the defeat of ISIS, but Middle Eastern countries still fear the group's re-emergence. In a joint press conference, Iraq's Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi called for greater cooperation against terrorism. France's President Emmanuel Macron said stability in Iraq is important for peace in the region.
La stabilité The stability of Iraq is, for us, essential for the stability of the whole region. I believe that what you are currently doing, with Iraq continuing to win the battle for security, which is rebuilding itself by keeping its unity.
President Emmanuel Macron pledged to help Iraq in its fight against terrorism by providing arms and ammunition.
France wants to remain a prime partner for Iraq's security by helping to reinforce your anti-terrorist arsenal, to protect your borders, to rearm your security services, by notably contributing to the integration and the reconversion of many fighters.
Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi said ISIS has been defeated but is still a threat for war-torn Iraq.
We have fought against Daesh together, we have sacrificed a lot together, and as you said, Mr. President, Daesh was destroyed on a territorial level. Well, this so-called state was destroyed, but the Daesh organization still exists and is trying to get back on its feet, and in every way they can.
It is Abdul Mahdi's first state visit to France since being elected premier last year.
Death toll from floods and mudslides in South Africa has risen to 87. Previously, the government put the death toll at 70. The widespread flooding over the Easter weekend left thousands of people displaced, mainly in the KwaZulu-Natal province. Torrential rains inflicted massive damage on public and private infrastructure. President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared a period of national mourning from May the 1st to 7th. In Algeria, protests have entered their 11th week, with thousands pushing for the restoration of democracy. Campaigners are demanding the immediate resignation of the interim president and prime minister. Thousands have taken to the streets in their ongoing movement to re-establish democratic rule. Parliament has appointed an interim president, setting July the 4th as the date for the postponed presidential election. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has ruled out cooperation with right-wing populist parties for the European elections. Merkel met Niger's President Mahamadou Issoufou in the capital, Niamey. More in this report.
With the EU elections drawing closer, right-wing populists are using their support as a future policy trade-off. European Union Parliament's first official polls show that right-wing forces will likely make major gains in the upcoming elections. German Chancellor Angela Merkel met with Niger President Mahamadou Issoufou in the capital Niamey. She said that her Christian Democratic Union Party will not make alliance with the right-wing populist parties after the European elections. Merkel renounced support for all the populist parties.
Firstly, we have suspended the membership of FIDS within the European People's Party, and secondly, I fully support the declarations of the leading candidate of the European People's Party that there won't be any cooperation with right-wing parties after the election.
The German Chancellor said her government is doing all it could to get anarchist wave under control. With nationalist populism on the rise, this year's election is seen by many as decisive for the European Union's future. The elections will be held between May the 23rd and 26th.
The World Health Organization has said that Ebola death toll in Democratic Republic of Congo has crossed 1,000. Surge in death toll has raised concerns that the epidemic is escalating and can get out of control.
Since the Ebola outbreak in last August, at least 1,510 cases have been recorded in North Kivu and Ituri provinces of Congo. This is the 10th Ebola epidemic in Congo, where the virus was first identified in 1976.
As of 1st of May, we have 1,510 cases of Ebola virus disease in North Kivu and Ituri provinces of the Democratic Republic of Congo, which includes 994 deaths.
Recent spike in cases is also attributed to a halt in treatment following attacks on the anti-Ebola centers. The treatment of patients has been marred by 119 attacks on health workers since January.
Since January, we've experienced 119 separate attacks, 42 which have been directly on health facilities, with 85 health personnel either injured or killed in those settings. So we are dealing with a difficult and volatile situation.
It is the second worst Ebola outbreak in history after 11,000 people died of the disease in 2014 in West Africa.
SpaceX has successfully launched its 17th cargo mission to the International Space Station. A Falcon 9 rocket lifted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida. The rocket was carrying a Dragon capsule with 5,500 pounds of goods. The vehicle will arrive at the orbiting lab on Monday. It is only 2 weeks since the passenger version of the Dragon capsule exploded during an engine test. In South Africa, colored community faced marginalization during the apartheid. Even now, the community is troubled by the lack of employment opportunities and accommodation.
South Africa is the continent's most industrialized economy, with businesses worth millions of dollars. Despite this, the country still faces the legacy of its history of racial segregation. Its colored community claims to have been further marginalized by the government since the end of the apartheid era.
They are marginalizing us, they are pressing us down. It's as if when our forefathers were oppressed because of a certain regime, they were not white enough, and now it's because we're not black enough. We say enough is enough as this community.
Majority of the community lives in the colored township of Johannesburg's El Dorado Park. Most of them are unemployed and live in small spaces. They believe that they are deprived of opportunities to prosper due to the color of their skin.
They're neglecting us. We're too white to be black. We're the whites, we're too black to be white.
Yes.
Tired of being in the middle. No, we're tired of being in the middle, so we see that we can do things our own way.
Many desperate youths have turned to drugs. Some in the colored community are nostalgic of apartheid. They say apartheid government used to look after their education, health and housing needs.
Seeing that we have been neglected, pushed back, put in the side, one side, for us we're the forgotten sheep. They classified us as the forgotten sheep. We as people are unemployed, there's no jobs. We are struggling where we come from. We are 6, 8, 10 in a yard.
South Africa's colored community is often referred to as the country's First Nation.
Moving on, an iconic pyramid in Albania's capital of Tirana is set to become an IT hub. The 127,000 square foot behemoth has previously served as a museum, NATO base, TV studio and a nightclub. A symbolic landmark of Albania, the pyramid Tirana is a relic portraying a turbulent past and a hopeful future. After years of neglect, the crumbling structure is now set for rebirth as an IT hub. Built as a museum for the legacy of Albania's ruler Enver Hoxha, the pyramid has served multiple purposes.
Went through a fantastic series of uses. It was a youth cultural center, it was a NATO base for operating missions in the Balkans, it was a jazz festival venue, it was a concert venue.
The 127,000 square foot behemoth has wedges of graffiti covered marble. Tirana administration believes this reincarnation of the pyramid is symbolic of the city's modernization.
We are trying to, how do we prepare for expansion, but how do we save some parts of the tradition? How do we transform to a new society?
The pyramid of Tirana was originally erected 30 years ago. In Taiwan, an artist is keen to revive the traditional hand-tapping tattoo technique of his ancestors. Instead of a tattoo machine, the Paiwan tribe uses steel needles to perform the art. More in this report.
Taiwanese believe their indigenous tattoo culture depicts their social status, spiritual protection, and the afterlife. The art faced a decline after being banned, first Japanese colonizers and later the Chinese nationalist government. But one Taiwan artist, Kajai Pat Jaidras, is determined to revive the lost tradition.
Within our Paiwan culture, pit viper represents an ancestral spirit and guardian god. We have snakes, the sun, and male eagles as guardian gods. This is to say, this is quite special. These triangular shapes represent the feathers of eagle wings.
The traditional tattoo pigment was a mixture of charred millet stalks and soot. Tattoo artist Kajai Pat Jaidras uses modern ink along his wooden handle and steel needles.
As the tattoos are on your body, they need to reflect your identity and social status. So this is why you need to talk to your family and your tribe's leader. Only after all family members have discussed and agreed that this pattern fits you, you can come back to me.
Hand-tapping tattooing is still practiced in some indigenous cultures in Samoa, the Philippines, Hawaii, and other islands in the Pacific.
Now bringing you stories from the world of sports, we start from basketball. The Milwaukee Bucks have beaten the Boston Celtics 123 points to 116 in the Eastern Conference semifinals. The victory enabled the Bucks to lead the 7-game series 2-1. In a thrilling contest, the Celtics were leading till the halftime, but the Bucks fought back with scoring 40 points in the third quarter of the game. Giannis Antetokounmpo completed a double-double with 32 points and 13 rebounds for the Bucks. The Eastern Conference sides will face each other again for the fourth game on Monday. U.S. Jason Duffner has taken a one-shot lead after the second round of the Wells Fargo Championship. Meanwhile, Joel Dahmen and Max Homa are standing at the second spot with the total of 10 under par. Playing at Quail Hollow, Jason Duffner shot 7 birdies and an eagle in the second round. He carded an 8 under 63 to reach 11 under par for the tournament. Duffner set an early target with building a total of 131. The American leads with 1 stroke ahead of Joel Dahmen and Max Homa. Both Dahmen and Homa have locked the second spot with standing at 10 under par. These are all the stories in detail we have for you this hour. You're welcome to follow us online on all social media by the name of Indus.News.